Hey guys, Coach Barr here. This week we're talking about major events and battles from World War II. Last week you guys learned about the build up to World War II and why Germany was so rearing to go. And now we're going to talk about kind of how they were allowed to do that and the consequences of their decisions and the course of the war that follows. It all starts with Hitler obviously building back up and trying to regain that land and that power and that position of authority throughout Europe that they had lost after World War One. He starts by rearming what's called the Rhineland, which was supposed to be a neutral position between Germany and France. He then marches down and annexes Austria. Nobody bats an eye, despite the fact that there was the League of Nations, which was supposed to keep people in check. Again, they were so terrified of another conflict that they kind of just let him do what he wanted. It was considered appeasement, is what it was called. And appeasement was basically letting Germany do what it wanted in the hopes that their aggressive behavior would stop, and in the process, they would avoid another war. After Austria, he took over parts of Czechoslovakia with the basically approval of the British, and then he took over more of Czechoslovakia, and then finally, in an agreement with the Soviet Union with Stalin, he invaded Poland, and that was the line in the sand. Apparently, England had a new prime minister, Winston Churchill, who was much more aggressive and much more willing to stand up to Hitler. And when Hitler made that move, Churchill took action. Um, Hitler invades Poland September 1st, 1939, and by September 3rd, 1939, England, Great Britain, which is England, and France had declared war on Germany. Interestingly enough, not the Soviet Union. I guess they hadn't been as aggressive prior to that point. So Germany was the Germany and their allies, Italy and Japan, were now at war with England and France. At first, there wasn't too much going on. The first 6 months wasn't too much going on between the major powers. Germany focused more on Eastern Europe and Northern Europe. They had allies basically in Norway, and they occupied Norway. They occupied Denmark. Um, they occupied Eastern Europe, and then they turned their sights on France. Uh, France had built up this huge defensive fortification, Maginot Line was what it was called, with a bunch of the money, the reparations that Germany had paid to them after World War One. But that was on the border between France and Germany. Makes sense. But the Germans weren't dummies. They knew it was there, and they went around it. They went through Belgium. They conquered the Netherlands and into France. And within 6 weeks of this offensive, this new offensive against the Netherlands, Belgium, and France, France had surrendered, capitulated. And northern France was completely under the thumb of the Nazis. Southern France is what was called what was considered Vichy France, which was free France, but they were still um, told what to do by the Nazis, even if they weren't directly controlled. So next, Hitler turns his sights on England. Great Britain, which, if you remember, is an island nation, has an incredibly powerful navy. And to soften them up first, he launches this months-long bombing campaign called the Blitz, and it's also called the Battle of Britain. Britain has recently created radar, developed radar, and that helps them turn back the German Air Force called the Luftwaffe. And ultimately, Hitler kind of gives up, gives in, and decides to let England do its thing. It's an island anyway. They can't really threaten Germany. So, in the end, who cares? Next, he turns his sights on the Soviet Union. They had had that agreement with Poland, an agreement not to fight each other called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Hitler breaks it, and in what's called Operation Barbarossa, he launches an enormous invasion of the Soviet Union, with the purpose of basically claiming all of the Soviet Union's European possessions, all of the western portion of the Soviet Union, of what used to be Russia. And he basically does that. Germany basically does that. They push all the way to Moscow, all the way to Stalingrad, to basically Asiatic Russia. But they're stopped. They're stopped at that point for a variety of reasons. The Russians were much better prepared, Soviets much better prepared than the Germans had thought. They were adamant in their desire to keep the Germans out, and they fought tooth and nail. They fought incredibly, incredibly hard, and ultimately the Germans were defeated. And this is really the beginning of the end for the Germans. This is the first major, major setback that they'd had, and it tremendously weakens the German capabilities in the east. They're fighting really a defensive battle from that point forward, um, and it stops their momentum, and it allows the other allies to start kind of threatening Germany in other areas. The Americans got brought into the war by the Japanese, and at the end of 1941, and together with the British, they start invading northern Africa. Germany has to commit forces there. After they take northern Africa, they're going to invade Italy. Italy has always been the weakest of the Axis powers, and so Germany has to commit forces there also. All the while, they're fighting a losing battle against the Russians. Finally, they're able to launch an offensive in western France, the invasion of Normandy, and now Germany is fighting three fronts. They're fighting in France, they're fighting in Eastern Europe against the Soviets, and they're fighting in the Southern Europe, in Italy, against the British and the Americans. And at this point, it's really just a matter of time. How long can Germany hold out? When will they surrender? Not if. So those are the major, major events in the European theater. We haven't discussed the Japanese theater yet, much in detail at all, but we will get into that next week along with the end of the war and the outcomes of the war. So, hope you guys learned something, and if you have any questions, please feel free to email and I'll get back to you. Thanks. Take care.